Right, here we're going to look at our next section of notes, and today we're really going to be combining some like terms and starting to solve some simple equations. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are now going to be using these little kind of dividers. So you'll see you have this little tab that has our learning targets on it. So you're going to fold it along the middle between where it says Unit 2, between those two. So then you're going to glue one side on each, one piece on each side, so that you have an actual like divider tab that we can then use, so we know exactly where Unit 2 is. And as always, we have our learning targets. So these are all both kind of together. So really today we're going to look at this first learning target. We're going to combine like terms to simplify expressions, and then we are going to kind of start with a couple of these other ones to be solving some simple equations. So what we're really going to start with is a vocab word. So our first thing is we have to figure out what an equation is. So go ahead and start with our word. Our word is equation, okay? Because we're really going to be looking at this and the difference. We're going to be looking at some expressions and some equations. So we really need to know what an equation is. So we're going to come up with our definition. Okay, the first thing we always have is a kind of our own personal definition. So my definition, my personal definition, is two mathematical expressions that are set equal. So the big thing to note is equation. If I'm having an equation, I have to have an equal sign. Okay, so that's one of our characteristics. So let's go ahead and add that to our corner over here about a characteristic of an equation. So an equation has an equal sign. That's one of the big things. One of the other characteristics that we're going to talk about when dealing with these equations, especially when we're starting to solve them, is what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. Okay, so to keep them even, to keep them equal, because we have that equal sign, I have to do the same thing on both sides. Okay, so now let's look at some examples. Okay, and some of these examples we're going to recognize, and some of these we will not. And that's okay. We just have to see that some examples of what our equation is. So I've got 3x plus 2 equals 4. So here I have two expressions that are set equal. Again, I can have y equals x minus 3. We're going to look at a lot of these kinds here pretty soon. Again, two expressions that are equal. I could have x squared plus 4x equals 2x minus 1. Two expressions with an equal sign. So now we can also have some non-examples, some things that are not equations. Something like 13. That's a number, but it's not an equation. We also have something like x squared plus 4x plus 2. It looks kind of similar to this one, but you see there's no equal sign, so it's not an equation. So now that we've looked through this is going to be that first part, just kind of grounding us into what we're really working with and what we're dealing with in this section. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that in so that it doesn't go anywhere while I'm trying to work on the rest of my notes. Okay, so the next thing we're really going to be looking at is we're going to be combining like terms. So you'll have a sheet that looks kind of like this. So go ahead and fold it, and on the top part we say combining like terms, and the second part we're going to look at the distributive property and then combine our like terms. Okay, so here is a case where you will need some different colors, so make sure you have those as well, and then we will get going on our steps. So on my next page is where this is going to go. So I'm going to have my combining like terms. And I'm just going to kind of fill it out like this. So when I'm combining like terms, my first step, and we're going to go through our steps over here, is I'm going to separate all terms. So by separating, I'm going to put just a vertical line between everything. So we will always want to be really careful with the positives and negatives and where those go. Okay? So you'll see here we're just separating all of our different terms. Then our second step is to color the terms that are the same. And that's where our different colors are going to come into play. So I see I have some A's, some B's, and some what we call constants that don't have any letter with them. So I'm going to color anything with an A, green. And I'm going to color anything with a B, purple. And anything without a color, anything without a letter is going to be red. Okay? So then our final step is we're going to combine those terms that need to go together. Okay? So I'm going to still live in this color just so I can keep it set in my brain that I've got negative 5a plus 3a. So I know a negative 5 plus 3 gets me to a negative 2 plus another 1 gives me to a negative 1 minus 1 gives me back to that negative 2a. And I did that by I took all the ones that were green and I combined them to get that. So then I'm going to look at my b's. And I see I have these two. And when I combine a negative 4 plus 6, I end up with a positive 2b. And then I can look at all of the things that didn't have a letter with it, all of my constant terms. And those are all right there. So I know I have a negative 2 plus 12, which gives me 10, plus 1 more, which is plus 11. So now I've combined all of the different terms and all of the different things that go together. So the other thing that we can see is we have to use the distributive property first. So here we've got some parentheses. So our first step, when we have some parentheses like this, is multiply everything inside the parentheses by what is outside. And in this case, it doesn't matter if it's before the parentheses or after the parentheses. We're still multiplying. Whenever I have these two terms, two things together, and I don't have a mathematical symbol between them, I know that I'm multiplying. So here I'm multiplying. So I'm going to multiply this value, this 6, times everything that's inside my parentheses. So I end up with 6m. 6 times a negative 2 is negative 12, plus 18n. Here I see I have a second set of parentheses, so I'm going to go ahead and distribute and multiply this as well. But here I need to be careful because this was a negative 4, so I have to distribute that negative as well. So it's minus 4m, negative times a negative is a positive, and 4. So now we can go ahead and go to step 2, and we just follow the steps above. Okay, so I first start by, I'm going to just get a different color, separating my different terms. And again, be very careful where your positives and negatives are. Then I'm going to color the terms that are the same. So I have some m's, and then I have an n, and I have some things without any variable. So then I can do my last step here and combine the things that are colored the same. So 6m minus 4m gives me 2m. Then I see I only have this one purple one, plus 18n. And then I've got my green one. So negative 12 plus 4 is minus 8. So here's how I can combine all of my different terms, by separating them out and then combining the ones that go together. Okay, so that's really where we're going to live. So the next thing that you're going to be doing is we're going to be translating some words into symbols. So again, you need colors. If you want to use highlighters for this one, that's okay as well, because we're going to be coloring lots of different things here. Okay, so this combining like terms can go ahead and go in your notebook. And really, it's not going to fit on the page with anything else we're doing today. Ooh, maybe it will, actually. Mine's going to fit with this other thing that we're doing. We're solving some simple equations. So if you want to leave space here, you certainly can, so that they can fit together, since they do actually go pretty well together, and one leads pretty directly into the other. But before we dive into solving those simple equations, we're going to talk about going from words into symbols. Because a lot of times in math, we're going to deal with different words, especially getting into the algebra. We have to go from words into symbols all the time. So first we're going to think about some addition and what words can mean addition. So I'm going to color my addition a certain color. And for me, that's going to be pink. So then anything up in this top box, and this is something that you're going to be doing right now that I'm not going to walk through everything with, is you're going to find everything that deals with addition. So I know added to is an addition word. I also know that sum is what I do when I add. So I'm going to color that pink as well. So you are going to spend some time here practicing and just going through. I'm going to make subtraction green. So I know subtraction is minus, and I know reduced by would be a good subtraction word. Less than, those kinds of things. So this is part of those things that I'm going to check when we do our notebook checks, is did you actually go through and think about which words turn into which mathematical thing that I do? So I want you to take a few minutes, and it could take a little bit of time, to go through and actually mark those up and get them all colored in and shaded. And I'm going to be checking this when I do our notebook checks. Okay, so make sure you spend a little time with that. Then the last thing we're really going to do is we're going to start our work with solving equations. Okay, so you're going to need this purple one. When we are solving equations, when we solve, our goal is to get rid of everything that's not the variable. So we want to undo what's being done. And there's 4 really simple kind of ways we can do that. The first one is our addition property. Okay, and what our addition property tells me is if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C. So what does this mean in our own words? So what that really means is if I add something to the both sides, I end up with the same equation. So go ahead and take a minute and fill out this part. This is your personal definition of what the addition property means. If this is the math behind it, and if I add the same thing, I want you to put that into your own words. So now let's look at an example. So I see that I have this x minus 4 equals 10. So I'm asking what is being done to this, and I see I'm subtracting. So to undo that, I'm going to go ahead and use my addition property of equality. So when I do that, I know I have to add the same thing, and I always have to do it to both sides, so that my equation, right, when we did our equation where we have to do it to both sides, stays the same. So since I'm adding 4 over here, I'm left with x equals 14. Okay, so using my addition property, I can undo any subtraction. That's going to be kind of key here. So then another thing, I'm looking at my subtraction property. And it's really similar to that addition property. If I have A equals B, so I have 2 things that are equal, then I can subtract the same thing from both sides. So now take a minute and write that in words. So, and then here's our example. I see I've got x plus 9 equals 13. Well, I notice I'm adding, so to undo this, right, because solving means get the variable by itself, by undoing, I would subtract my 9 from both sides. So when I subtract 9 from the left side, I'm left with x equals 13 minus 9 is 4. So I can solve it that way. Another property that we're looking at right here is our multiplication property. Okay, so again, here's the kind of algebra. If A equals B, then A times C equals B times C. So again, what that means, and you're going to go ahead and write that in your words, is if I multiply both sides by the same thing, I end up with the same equation. So let's look at our math example. So here I see I have x divided by 3, and yes, this is written as a fraction. That's generally how we're going to see division. So I've got x divided by 3 equals 12. Well, to undo that, I want to do the opposite or the inverse operation, so I know I'm going to be multiplying. So what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I multiply both sides by 3, so I end up with x equals 12 times 3 is 36. So that's using my multiplication property. Then our final one, which you can probably guess, is our division. Okay. So if A equals B, then A divided by C equals B divided by C. So if I divide both sides by the same thing, I end up with my same equation. So let's take a look at what that kind of looks like. So here I have 4 times x equals 12. So I see I'm multiplying here. So to undo any multiplication, I'm going to use my division property and divide both sides by 4. Because what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, so I'm left with x equals 12 divided by 4 is 3. Okay, so I can use these different properties of equality to simplify and to solve for some pretty simple one-step equations. We're going to get into, and in our next couple lessons, learn about what do I do if there's multiple things being done to that variable. How do I get it by itself? In what order do I do those things? Okay, so here we're just looking at our simple equations, meaning just one thing. And how do I undo that? Okay, so that is kind of where we started for today. So that's going to be where we're really ending. And then in our next lesson, we're really going to be looking at, okay, so now that we've done some of these simple equations, how do I know if it's an equation or if it's an inequality, or what do I do with it? So now you're going to spend a little bit of time working on your practice in Khan Academy and also the packets that you have. And please come find me whenever you get stuck.